This is our last section of the first part of the course. We introduced with leadership, then with markets, then with innovations, with political culture, and we now look at the idea of consumption and urban scenes. If we have anything like a textbook for the course, this is what we're talking about. And that's the Chinese version here, which has been more widely read, I think, probably than the English. This we worked on for 13 years. Dan Silver was a grad student and then pushed on. He's now a full professor at the University of Toronto, sociology. He's been a band player on the drums in the Bay Area, where he went to college, and here where he was in grad school, and then done lots of kinds of things, organizing, public policy, trying to see what kinds of things work, and he's learned a lot of new things. We've all learned a lot in doing this book and continuing. We had about 15 assistants through most of the 13 years in economics, political science, sociology, public policy, and a lot of turnover. So most of them were different every year. But some of them stayed on more than that. And Dan most of all, and he started out and did some very basic things. He did a PhD thesis in the Social Thought Committee, which is an unusual committee. It's more of a theorizing, philosophy, things like that. But he picked up all kinds of stuff, statistical modeling, doing ethnographic field work, all kinds of stuff. So he is, I encouraged him, if he wanted to keep on, to be the first author, so he's officially listed first. The core idea, I can say, amusingly, if you like, came from a reception of the Culture Committee in the former home of the owner of the Playboy organization called Hugh Hefner. He came from Chicago, and he had a private personal home, and it was bought by a guy who was involved with the Culture Committee, and so we had about 5 or 6 people, and we were talking about an idea of scenes. I didn't have in mind, in fact, I didn't think of that until right today, but the centerfold Playboy fold out of a beautiful lady is not exactly what we had as the inspiration of a scene, but we could perhaps even think of that. The 4 or 5 people, I don't think Dan was one of them at that point. There were people. Larry Rothfield was the main senior person. He was a professor of English comparative literature. He's worked on film scripts. He's an unusual guy, and so somehow he read some of what we'd done, and he said, "Why don't we work together somehow?" And so we started talking, and we had a guy who was advanced guy from Princeton. There were 2 top universities that had cultural policies, cultural centers in the U.S. And they were Princeton and Chicago. And Princeton closed its down, and we have wound it down to some degree, but the impact has been huge in the sense that the the arts and culture have come to the University of Chicago in a huge way, and has helped to transform the university. And I say that in part because there was so little here. On the other hand, it has taken off in the world, and that's one of the findings we came up with, which I summarized mostly last time from the book called Kentuckville Karaoke, which has some of that background on finding where and why do organizations matter. The core of Tuckville's theory was organizations build legitimacy. People build fences together they become citizens, neighbors, they trust each other more if they work together. That's democracy. That's his image. And so he in a sense, they're bottom up, average citizens, not leaders, not highly educated, and so forth. The opposite, and he came from France, and he was a nobleman, aristocrat. I mean, he looked at the world as democracy is coming to Europe, it's coming to France. What's it going to happen in France? So he would, and he and others in France set him over to try to figure things out. And the image, in a sense, that and this is what, 1810, 1820, only a few years ago was the French Revolution, and what was the visible definition of democracy for the French? It was not two Massachusetts farmers. It was the guillotine chopping off the heads of thousands of the top leaders of the aristocracy and the leadership of all of France. And they had instead three words, liberty, equality, fraternity, and they wanted to transform not only France but the world. And not in the first few weeks, but when Napoleon came to leadership, he led, and the armies of the French they were so revolutionary, they felt that when they wanted to bring this message of what they thought of as democracy and so forth to the world, and they marched with many people like Beethoven, Hegel, saying, "Welcome, we need you. Germany is a feudal, old-fashioned society. We want to bring these new things to France. Napoleon, tell us about it." So Beethoven named one of his works and Hegel talked about rationality and so forth, and etc. That changed to some degree later on, but the point was many of these ideas were spreading and went to the edges of Moscow, not really into Russia, but into Russia. They got defeated by the cold winter and the tough Russians, but they went south all the way to Cairo, so forth, and brought back a number of statues which are still in Paris and so forth. But the point is, it changed the world. The conception of where and how cities and societies should be governed then in the 19th century was fought over rather bitterly, especially in France, but also in many other places in Europe. They had another big revolution in 1848. Bismarck in the 1870s really created the German national state by fighting against the French and defeating the French, essentially. And the French felt very, very morose and reshaped a number of their institutions to adopt some of the best things from Germany. The English watched across the sea and worried about Napoleon, worried about Bismarck, and of course later on about Hitler. And so the differences among these countries, say France, Germany, and England, are widely used to try to see where and how these so-called European values are especially distinct from, say, the West versus, say, India and China and Japan. Where and why, and of course Africa and Middle East. Why and how did this Western European set of activities, institutions, modernism, democracy, how did it emerge? And this was, say, Max Weber working actively on that. mentioned, the big interpretations, let's say to simplify them, the Marxist interpretation, Weberian interpretation, Marxist more materialist, more capital historical oriented, the Weberian more multi-causal, multi-dimensional, and with more active individuals changing their lives, if you will. The world still in around 1890, 1900 was still a poor place compared to now. Most people were, on the edge of not quite starvation, but they had to worry each day about, would they have food? Would the harvest be okay? Would they, et cetera, et cetera. By the end of the 20th century, most of agriculture has, the labor force has gone from 50, 60%, 70% in agriculture to leaving that to 10, 5, 1 or 2, something like that in the US, a bit higher in China, but it's going down rapidly because of mechanization, machines, etc. But the explosion has now happened much more well over the 20th century in the US, especially I'd say after World War II with the explosion of mass higher education, major driver of transforming a lot of things, along with enough income to be able to think about what you might do beyond starve this week. And so those things, if you will, we've talked about in some of the propositions earlier about where and why did these things change. But one of these is change in the simple way to summarize it is in terms of the economy is the rise of the service sector and of consumption as an activity, not just of producing cameras or movie stars, but of creating, in a sense, of entertainment, that you can not only work most of the time. Now, many of us in Hyde Park at the USC, most people don't really realize that. That's a bit of an overstatement, but let's say. We are so hardworking here to imagine that most people don't enjoy it and don't do it a whole lot of their time, but we are different. Most people spend a lot more of their time thinking about having what kind of beer, what to have for dinner, what to do, which games do you play with your children, etc. So in that sense, we need to tell ourselves, so that is what I'm beginning to say, and I'm making a statement, is we want to become more self-conscious. What we do here in Hyde Park is be more analytical. So even if we are not representative, the fact that we are different, the question is where and why, helps the beginning of saying, why is Hyde Park different from Evanston or from the downtown or Bronxville where I live, which is mostly African American and many more poor people. Not that poor anymore, but they can talk that way when they have to. My second point, big point there is that the scene can be measured as a local geographic area, a neighborhood. And if we just study cities, or if we study nations, we have maybe 200 nations, some tiny ones, but the point is the number of cases is small. We don't have variables we can really separate out analytically because we don't have enough cases and enough variation. So if we go down to the states, but more to the cities, or even better, the neighborhoods, then we get to little units. These are more like fruit flies. These are more experimental variations that we can study and we can analyze statistically. Instead of have everything mushed together, Germany is big, it's tough, it's rich, it's this, it's that. I mean, that's too simplistic. The question is, where and why? What's the the impact of income and what's the impact of education? What's the difference? What's the difference if you have both, or if you have just one or just the other, and so forth? Those things get more complicated, and to get those sorted out, you can't just have people who are only both rich and educated. You need to have some people who are poor and educated, and others who are rich and low education, et cetera, with 50 other variables. Okay, so how to make sense of this, and to see where is the world changing, where are nations shifting away, and another way of putting it was the plan of the Chinese leadership has especially prioritized economic growth from the time of Mao up to very recently. It was 2 or 3 years ago that they adopted scenes right out of the Scenescapes book, but they dropped the numbers such as the economic growth amount, which will be 7% or 9% or something like that. That marked visibly a focus on consumption, on the scene, on making the lifestyle of domestic life for Chinese not what you would read about in the Western press, which is about international battles and so forth. They want to be average folks. They want to have fun with their families, et cetera, et cetera. So where and how can we assist in consumption? So there were about 100 Chinese who came to visit here in the last 20 plus years. And some of them got together. We have a Scenes Academy, and we're studying scenes. And it's because of their activities that this got into the 5-year plan. And so that in turn has led to a lot of interest. There have been about 10 books now which have come out, 300 papers dealing with scenes in China and elsewhere. And I'm going to just try to give you a couple of overview points here. Try to focus on the big themes. And here we go. And this, of course, is a many-person collaboration. Dan Silver, especially, I've talked about. Steve Sawyer, we worked with for 3 years and consulted with the city of Paris, and did a report on Paris and its neighborhoods. Maxime Jaffray I'm working with right now on the southern French cities, because they're fighting with Paris with the interpretation of what France is. They have a very different conception of what France is. It's more international, more including more foreigners coming in. Clemente Navarro in Seville has worked on in Seville, the #1 economic base is bullfights. They have massive numbers of visitors, and they take this, and the region supports a lot of money to play up tourism based on the bullfights. So in that sense, consumption has been the economic base of Seville for a long time. Marta Klokotko did her PhD on a small town in Poland, and it was poor farmers who were really disappearing. Their economy was going down. They didn't know what to do, and so one town started doing a little bit on the arts, a little bit of theater, a little bit of dance, a little bit of shows, art shows, and it began to attract people in the whole region, and then it took off. We have a few pictures, but she then did a wonderful analysis of this and continued with it ever since. Christine Sakamoto, Japanese in name, ethnicity, background, but she's a Brazilian citizen, and has worked with us on chicken and eggs, statistical, quantitative modeling of all these kinds of processes. She's built new data files, new modeling patterns. Chad Anderson, very smart American, following his career with a Korean wife in Korea. Wono Jang in Seoul. Yoshiaki Kobayashi in Japan, I've worked with for about 20 plus years, and we have a new paper on Japan, the first paper on scenes in Japan, and we're getting it revised now for publication. Chong-Yo Lee was a leading senior official. He's now an official with Incheon, but basically he's an analyst of culture in Korea and in the world. He Ji is from Beijing, and we'll have a picture of her later on. So these are some of the people we have. Okay, diving in. Factors of production in the 20th century. Land, capital, and labor. This is Alfred Marshall. These things come together to build the economy. This was if you will, a socialist inspired interpretation of having to work and you don't really like it very much. This is I'll skip that for over here. The title is No Factories, No Smoke. Which city scene? When the Industrial Revolution came to England, they built a lot of factories, and London was the dirtiest city, maybe not in the world, but it was darn dirty. Smoke everywhere. Birmingham, Liverpool, and so forth. And they made money. They shipped textiles and so forth back and forth. And they were ahead of the rest of the world in building industry. They started to build a factory in Paris around 1800, and then it started to have smoke. And the Parisians said, "Stop! We don't want smoke on the beautiful city of Paris." And said, "But you can't have industry unless you have smoke." "We don't care. Forget the industry. We want a beautiful city." And it was the major case. Is that in Marx? Is there another stage from the feudalism to capitalism to socialism through the arts? No. Even though Marx himself paid a lot of attention to the arts. But the guy who really made more sense of this was Walter Benjamin. He was Marxist in background. He was German. He's a leading intellectual from Weimar. But the second half of his career he spent in Paris trying to figure out and to theorize how and why can you have consumption and aesthetics in the arts be, and how can a city, an entire city, build its whole economy on the opposite of what you've been told in England or in Germany and being done by those countries. And his quick answer was, if you have little shops and it rains, half of Paris, it's raining through the whole, October through May, it rains or it's drizzly and it's cold in Paris. Not really cold, but it's not that great. So around 1810 or so, they figured out, hey, we can use glass and steel and put it together, and we can build a little glass roof, and we'll call it an arcade. And instead of having just 12 individual shops, we'll have an arcade of all of them together, and then people could come out and look in the shops and do shopping, and then begin to think, what is beautiful? What's an attractive pair of shoes? What kind of cravat do we want? What sort of umbrella? And consumption thus featured these kinds of issues. And Benjamin was still a Marxist. So when he wrote about this, we'll talk about it a little later as we go on, but this was the bourgeoisie holding down the proletariat, potentially having revolutions, but nevertheless doing other things, and at the same time was building the arcade. And this then later on, at the end of the 19th century, became the department store, and then later on the mall. But it's focusing on where and how can we make aesthetics become incorporated in consumption, not just get the cheapest, the fastest, the most efficient clothes, but something that looks better. These are some theorists that we build on. Tucker Parsons is in the middle there, Max Weber on the left, Alfred Marshall on the right. And then the other people, these are the wild artists, if you will. Baudelaire in the top right, Balzac in the lower right. And then the theorists of this, Richard Wagner on the left, and then in the late 20th century, Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great anthropologist, who, what they did, which we build on, which is a little quite different from most of the theories in social science, is not to start with one assumption that there's one variable, and that one variable at least will assume that the rest doesn't matter, or 5 is the only thing that matters. These two guys took their world around them. And so with Lévi-Strauss, he studied texts of myths, 4 volumes called Mythologie. And so he studied different kinds of, like the Oedipus myth, or and then he got variations of these in the Brazilian jungle people, and how and why these myths changed in different villages within that area. And then he brought in, as he wrote other works, that came from all kind of field work, especially by the English anthropologists. But the point is, he took he put numbers on these instead of saying they're differences. He had maybe 300 different variations of this one same myth, and he says, okay, how does it change if the little village is patrilineal, or if they have matrilineal? And if you have matrilineal, what you found was, hey, the woman is shown in the myths as an exploiting, dominating figure, and she kills off her husband. Things like that. So the myth and the society around it are interrelated, and so where and how. So Wagner didn't have a theory in the quantitative. In numbering the myths is not quite too fancy quantitative, but he thought as a scientist. Wagner thought as an artist. He wanted to revolutionize music and more, and he took the music from the Italian opera, from Beethoven, from Mozart, and he destroyed them. So the old way that those music was being done was imposing certain kinds of notes. Instead, we will create it based on feelings, emotions, love, jealousy, murder, hatred, patriarchal, patricide, brothers killing each other, and so forth. And then this was as well. He took this from earlier stories of not quite ancient, we say semi-ancient, by old myths of Germanic tribes. So he put these together and put these in four works, which were the ring cycle. And so the point of what they both had, and what Wagner did, let me add quickly, was he talked about it as a leitmotif, a theme. And he would have hundreds of little themes, like okay, so you have something like that, and that fits with one character or one kind of activity. But then you have others who come up, so this is the giants are coming in and they're going to build the castle, and then after they etc. So that is, you have characters and actions give you a feel for the activity in the music itself. But the leitmotifs, he then uses hundreds and hundreds of these, but they're not random or uniquely or whatever put together. They're often structured by taking one thing. I use the example of patriarchy and matriarchy. When you have the world as it's seen by Wotan the god, then you have his wife who wants to have more responsibility by the father. You should take care of those. I'm telling you, You've been fooling around with those earthlings. You've got children down there on Earth. You must kill your own children. And that's the story of the four. How the tragedies and how these get fought out. Okay, so these in turn, new conceptions of taking all different kinds of things together and giving it an integrated whole, which included the music, the character, the actor who's on the stage and singer, and then the way that this is performed. And he says, if you want to do this well, of an integrated artwork, a Gesamtkunstwerk, you've got to do it all yourself. And I'm doing it for myself. And this, because this gives it an emotional integration by choosing the right word, the right theme, the right combination, the right bum, ba bum, ba bum, ba, and so forth. Okay, that's the point of that is the economists, as I talked to you before, last time a little bit, the economists started with amenities. Ed Glazer. Amenities, in a sense, was the Chicago economics version of the Chinese 5-year plan. The Chicago theorist version was to say, not everything is money, not everything that you can buy in a market. In fact, you want clean air, you want happiness, you want people who are nice, you want friendliness, you want neighborliness, you want low crime. You can't buy any of these. These are indirect, much more complicated things, which include governments and people and different kinds of laws, and it's very tricky. So the economists began here to theorize and say, okay, what are amenities? How can we start to theorize? So things like higher education, not just higher education, but what does education bring? Does it give you more of a sense of sensitivity to something different? And can you become an artist? Can you try to do things differently? So Chicago folks began to theorize and measure these, but they tend to do it one at a time, like having a cinema, or having one painting on the wall, or one university. I worked with them. I worked with them for 20 years. I saw these were good ideas. They were very smart people. But I then said for a while, maybe some things aren't there. Maybe we could do this better. How could we do this better? And the big idea was not to study one or two or three of these things that hold together. Let's take all that we can get data on. Let's get hundreds of things in a particular scene. So if the scene here is Hyde Park, or let's say this window out of this view out of this window, what can we see here and what makes it different? Trees, building, color, the people walking by, how are they dressed? What kinds of cars? Is there smoke or not? Are there people shooting or not? Are there enough police around that things are quiet and calm? There are things which you can see from holding out, if you have a little video camera and put it right out the window, and same thing you do each day, you can see scenes if you begin to look for them, and so that's what I'm going to try to say. Not just how can we see it? What does it mean to see a scene? All right. So here's background of these: Walter Benjamin and Bertolt Brecht, two of these great German minds of the mid Weimar years, and of Benjamin, the Parisian theorist. Here's some other bits in recent years, such as of other challenges to establish social science in the 20th century. Tom Friedman said basically, a brief history of the 21st century, the world is flat. The idea is no longer that this is post-Cold War, therefore we can trade with China. We can buy Chinese this and sell them that. And as the world is doing this everywhere, we can have more division of labor, we can have more wealth, we can have more prosperity for everybody. That's the potential. But if we do it wrong, we can have problems. Okay, but at least that conceptualization of globalization is linked with and with electronic communication, a production in a more efficient way, having more leisure time, more entertainment, using the entertainment for building a new life. These are things which lead to initially it was first was we talked about the book, The New Political Culture, a couple of weeks ago. Core ideas are still here and are basically the same. For the first three, and these three, we have market individualism coming out of little factories and small farmers. Within the family, we have women working, not just taking care of the kids, not just children working, picking weeds and harvesting corn. They get scholarships. They get better jobs than their parents do. They think of, and then they get more education, they get more media access, and they think in terms of more tolerance of the individual and group variations. Then the third one down here is the new box, is culture. Cultural pluralism is emerging. We could call this diversity, at least the end of absolutes, the decline of the quest for sort of Cartesian certainty and Newtonian mechanisms, which are clear and specific and precise. Or the rise of relativity, hermeneutics, pragmatism, Kuhn's constructivism, Picasso, Ernst Einstein. These were the core of cultural pluralism emerging, say, roughly the end of the 19th century. And these then, and then within government, in a sense, you could say some of the welfare state programs that have solved the most urgent problems of poverty, people are then asking to make citizens more happy. So then if my mother dies or someone gets hit with a car, and the lawyers come in and say, yes, this woman is destroying the happiness of her children, that will be $875 million, please. How can you measure happiness? That was in a sense an explosion of how can the welfare state take on those responsibilities if they become this sort of subjective concept. Okay, but how to make sense of these? Initially, it was the new political culture, and it's now later the Scenescapes. Okay, so let's see, I'm looking at that clock. The clock's not working at all.
Oh.
What's the time, please?
Sorry. 5:10. Okay. 5:10.
Can you make the feet a little wider? Then the wider, it doesn't go any further down. No, maybe it doesn't. Okay. Components of scenes. A neighborhood, like a zip code. Concerts, physical structures, people, activities, values, the right or wrong way to live, or the right or wrong way to theorize the speed of a rock falling, and so forth. These inform the other things more specifically from these general values. These are pretty abstract. We then get down to three different kinds of these: legitimacy, theatricality, and authenticity, and within each we have 5 more. And these are the key 15 dimensions of scenes. Dimensions of scenes: neighborliness, transgression, exhibitionism, glamour, formal. And I'll mention these are higher in LA and New York. In Chicago, we have more localism by neighborhood, more ethnic solidarity, like Poles and Italians and Chinese. The state is stronger with the traditions of daily. The corporate is a sense, not in the sense of corporatism, but of sort of brand identity, of branding, and in a sense of well, I won't try to stress so much there. I was saying, I'm making the point, the concept of authenticity is a big concept, and we break it up into 5 parts, and the same thing with each of these. But then one way to do this is to try to find a city And if I'm using a big city like New York, Chicago, and LA, I'm simplifying a lot, because within any big city, we've got all of these. And so it's better in a sense to go down to a little street within a big city like Chicago or New York or Beijing, or to study 300 people living together in one village in China. Because one Chinese village will be probably a little more small, maybe a little more homogeneous, we hope, than if we had any street, in the middle of Tokyo or somewhere else. Okay, so this is what has led us to build up a data file with lots of data at a very small level of units, including individuals where we can too. And then how do we get from these things how can we get from these abstract concepts to operational tools? And we code a lot of it, so we have all kinds of data, which I'll show you in a minute, but we code these data in terms of essential. We simply put them from high to low, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 3 is just neutral. It's neither none of these. But on the high number 5 is essential, very high. Glamour for couture shows, for instance. Whereas at the other end, antithetical is the opposite, or opposite, such as egalitarianism versus country clubs. Okay. We have a couple. It's two different ways that we classified these. I initially came up with the ones across the top, which were from that Hugh Hefner party. And we had things like Black is Beautiful, Renoir's Low, La La Tinsel, Gary Becker's Buzz, Rossini's Tour. These are the big concepts that we started with. But then we said, these are pretty, maybe we wanted something which is a little more abstract. We want this to work in China. We want this to work in Nigeria, not just in the US and Europe. So these more abstract dimensions are on the left, which are the same as the 15 we saw before. But this is a matrix where we can look at things where we can transmute from one to the other. Okay, another big point it more or less shows you is the rise of culture. The World Values Survey is conducted in usually 1,500 citizens, national samples every year or so, in now maybe 100 countries. And we found, this was Robert Putnam and others talked about, organizational membership is going down. This is going to be the end of, not the end, but this will a weakening of trust, a weakening of the legitimacy of the leadership. This is bad. We got his data. We got over other data like this, and we analyzed it, and we said, "What? Are we sure this is happening everywhere? For churches, yes. For unions, yes. For Boy Scouts, yes, less. These are going down. But the arts and culture are taking off, doubling in a couple of years, tripling in the Netherlands, and so forth. So the arts, for some people, are taking off. And then we'll show we've got more evidence pushing on. But just getting the simple descriptive data, there are more people who are spending more time and money on the arts. And the largest amount of increases here in other countries. These are national data. The Netherlands was first, the US is second, Sweden, Denmark, Canada, Belgium, Korea. These are all pretty high. It gets slower as we get over here to the right. But at least this is not just one country. And if we look at a specific industry, getting to smaller, not the whole economy, but we get to things like hospitality and leisure, which the census reports as part of the GNP from 1939 up to here. Monotonic almost increase. There are no business cycles. There's no depression. There's no recession. These activities have been booming through the whole World War II to present. Okay, that says something. These are the people working with us on, you saw their names I mentioned briefly before. This is Kiji in the lower right from China. This, I talked to you about this book a couple of days ago. And here we are with Scenescapes. This was a work done by part of one chapter by Dan Silver and Joseph Yee, who's a Korean. And we began to look at certain areas where we had some particularly dramatic changes, such as where and how do young black men don't know their fathers, they've dropped out of school, they're fighting with their mothers, they don't get along with their sisters, they don't go to church in general, but what have they found for them that gives them something they want to do? And they found God, yoga, and karate. They go to some evangelical churches, including some of the new conservative churches, which are racially bridging black and white faces together, the educational divide, and karate is what they learn in martial arts. This is Asian. All these things came from Asia. This is Joseph Yee's PhD, basically. So you have four things, and the ones which we studied here and we show them more generally are, the first was new, we could call evangelical churches, which are often conservative as well. New conservative, and the media often call it the new conservative right. On the other side, the media would call New Age, Berkeley, the new spirituality. What is there beyond Berkeley? This is not just poor black folks in the south side of Chicago. These are the children of the folks who made the money, and they're now however, okay, the bottom line for these things together is what joins together different kinds of people. And one answer is certain kinds of churches, evangelical, can join rich and poor, black and white, and so does popular culture. These folks, this is not Beethoven and Wagner. This is Hollywood, low-level Hollywood kind of stuff. But they're very, very popular. These are global stars. Okay. Popular culture is participated in even by folks on this campus. You can see it. This summer, some play it up, some play it down. But these things can join many different kinds of people, which are often divided when you talk about diversity. Diversity is a label for dividing people and fighting politically. This is happening right now. So how can we make sense of these things? One is to look at types of scenes, a cultural scene which is more like Wagner, expressing, communicating feelings, experiences, moods. That's the goal. The residential neighborhood where people live. Industrial clusters, factories, political arena, collective action. So we have different actors, different goals, different rules of the game, consumers, etc., amenities. Buzz is a key driver. It's an element circulating around to make the consumption pattern work. The neighborhood is founded on trust, the residential neighborhood. Factories, the economy works on money, political system, power. Okay, so we have the aesthetics becomes more important As we have more leisure, we have not only popular culture, but we have many different, we have 120 different kinds of bands out there. Many different kinds of rock, not just one. There are lots of kinds of rock, lots of kinds of house, lots of kinds of, etc. And making more sense of these in different ways, I'll just say in part that the French have, since I gave you the example of not having smoke through the whole 19th century, they focused on aesthetics. And this was the winner of a competition to build a massive new museum, art show, movies, lectures, library. It's one of the most popular places. It has more visitors than the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre combined. Okay. And it has shocking anti-traditional, so it's saying, you know, we're looking for new values. We're going to give you new things. And they did. So it has different aesthetics defining, instead of having chairs for movies, they have mats they can lie on the floor. So you can lie with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, and snuggle during the movies. 50 people, etc. That's not what you get in general with the movies. Okay, where does this is the, what's right or wrong? What's good or bad for culture, especially where in France, culture has been very important for centuries. And they created, however, only in the 1960s with André Malraux, they created a ministry of culture, and André Malraux was the first. He became famous because of his novel written about Beijing. Okay, one of the things he did was to build culture houses or little buildings across the medium-sized cities and basically. And there's something like 40 or so of these across France. And these would then be touring companies that might perform jazz or Bach or Shakespeare or Moliere, and they would perform at the highest quality of the national French culture tradition, which is to say, it was the same everywhere. No localism. If you live in Marseille or Lyon or another city, you're not supposed to be different. We're all French citizens. That came back to 1789. And they used the state to try to impose that, including immigrants. So this is controversial right now with all this stuff going on with the Arab, Christian, etc. So, and it was done fairly under General de Gaulle, top down. The new, or at least the conception from the 1980s onward, Jack Lang and his large notion of culture was there should be no hierarchy between minor art or high art, between noble and popular. Our way of living, of loving, the way we live, the way we cook contains also a beauty that should be introduced in the acts of social and civic life. Okay. This is a cultural relativism and a tolerance within the whole cultural area, which is a revolution for this strong top-down. So it tends to be more bottom-up. And it was so where and how, but how to do this has still been fought over right now, and this is part of why we're looking at these in different regions of within the Paris metro area, and then in other smaller cities. How much is this class? How much is income? How much is this just driven by money? Is this just rich versus poor? This is the distribution of incomes. The higher incomes are more green, dark green. Look at that for individual amenities. If we add up a bunch of amenities like cinemas, libraries, discotheques, sports clubs. They're scattered around, and maybe a little bit more in those areas of downtown Paris, and a little bit more on the left side where there are more affluent people. But it's not just there. And if you go then on down, here's glamour. Glamour is the closest, or closest to income. So that looks pretty much like the income distribution. But if we then look at three things, look at the right, exhibitionism, glamour, and charisma, and then look at these, in these four countries here. These are very different from each other, and from how much are there differences. That now this is the relationship between rent, how much you pay in rent, on average, and in a neighborhood, and the degree to which that neighborhood is also exhibitionistic, glamorous, or charismatic. And the point is, in Canada, this is the old English tradition, discreet. They don't show their money. They don't act glamorous. Americans are a little bit that way, but they're still it's the charisma. They're less charismatic. Okay. Spain is the opposite. Spain is a country of bullfights, of having a Franco, of having a Toreador, of having these kinds of things which play up exhibitionism, glamour, and charisma. Bicycle races and being winners in the bicycle races in the world. Okay, more generally, we then looked at this. These are the numbers shown in summary manner in that table in the bar chart. Other scenes dimensions vary considerably. Here's egalitarianism. This is the opposite. People who were in poor areas that used to be communist, especially, were lower in income. It's not that strong. I mean, maybe 0.3 or something like that. But the point is, these things are distributed around each other. And if we look then at this new term that was created by the New York Times writer David Brooks, the French think must be French because they're two French words: bourgeois and bohemian, and les bobos. These are especially in these neighborhoods up here. It's not in the middle of downtown Paris at all. So we have different areas which are okay. Then we get to how do we build these things? One way is to look at a song, a popular song. Bobo is constructed from these kinds of things. Les Bobo, Les Bobo, okay. You go to the Côte d'Azur, you're close to the IKEA library. These are the names of designers where you may go shopping for clothes, etc. These are the combinations of the 15 dimensions and how they join with one another. Then we have details that we're getting to case studies of some theater in Marseille, which our collaborator did, and they are to contrast one theater that's very top down and another that's more bottom up. And he's contrasting this by zip code and where people live and so forth. And this kind of map shows the concentration of the audience and the immigrants. So where do the immigrants live, and where do we have theaters and other? I guess it's the audience from this one theater in this case. Okay, so the point of that is that Paris and Marseille differentially are different. Paris tends to have more immigrants living with a little bit of their cultural activities, but they're not where the big, active, visible things like the Louvre and so forth. Those are downtown for tourists. I don't say they're for anybody who can go there. but the poor immigrants are living out in the areas that were formerly communist, lower status, with high-rise buildings, with lots of crime. Okay. So that's part of why we were invited by the mayor of Paris to help them. How can we make these areas which are not so attractive? And their instinct was to be like de Gaulle. And so they say, when the president of France and the minister of culture said, they announced one day, without talking to the local mayor, without people in the local town, they said, we're going to transfer the most classic work of opera and theater. It's not opera, it's called a comédie française. It's a theater, but it can be called comic opera. Different kinds of, but it was a classic institution in the middle of, right near the headquarters of the Ministry of Culture. So they announced, President of France, we're moving the Comédie Française to a lower status area, which is known traditionally as a communist, lower income neighborhood. And the next day, that same day, the mayor and the director of the theater said, you do not, we don't want you to come in here. We have our own theater. You can't take over our theater. This is our local theater. And they had months of hearings, and the president of France lost, and the Ministry of Culture lost, and the locals won. Okay, so people fight over what is, I mean, how can you help the poor people when the poor people want to do it their way? They don't want to be just the way that's the national top-down approach. Okay, so how to analyze this? We collected data from the national census. We've got especially yellow pages, electronic yellow pages of all kinds of things on cultural participation. And so these then are the raw data which we use to create these 15 scenes and their dimensions. And these are not so good, I would say. This gives you a flavor. This is the small town in Poland that Marta Krakowska studied. This was a cafe, but then it became very important because it began to have also political discussions and civic activities, as well as big popular bands and musical performances. So it would spread out at night and have hundreds of people right here, but it illustrates a distinctive scene. So what makes the people come to that? So that's the buzz. Buzz is trying to measure the amount of excitement in the scene. And one factor can just be the architecture. If you live with an old village, a peasant village, and then you have new architecture that looks like this, saying, wow, this is a new kind of city, new set of, it's a village, basically. It's a rural farming village, or it was. Okay. This is other scenes. Just get flashes of little bits of important scenes. I live in one of my favorites, artist Archibald Motley and the good times of the stroll in Bronzeville during the 20s, which was described as jammed with black humanity, night and day. Okay. Music. This was Louis Armstrong. Jazz was invented. All this stuff took off, and gospel was invented. The blues were invented in Bronzeville, right here. And people here are very proud of it. Okay. One of the best persons continuing this tradition is the Astor Gates. In his pottery studio in a converted beer warehouse in the past, and then he started to make things. And he got, this is December 2013. It was roughly then. He won a prize, an international prize in Italy for artists. He was the most important artist in the world in doing all kinds of things. Fiesta Gates, the black monks performing at St. Lawrence Church in Chicago during the demolition. Okay, so they're playing music surrounding the building being torn down. He combines aspect of Christian symbolism, lyrics, stories from the Bible with jazz, with gospel, with blues. These are some of the raw data for New York, Chicago, and LA, and the total of these to show you where do we start with. Pizza restaurants, Baptist churches, bookstores, Chinese restaurants, number 4th in the whole U.S. Catholic churches, but look at Catholic churches in Chicago, we're putting out 763. New York, 5 boroughs, all 5 boroughs in New York, only 300. LA, 225. This is a Catholic city. That's a very important marker of how this city works differently. Catholicism is an important part of it. Okay, so then we've got other things. We don't have, it's chopped off here. I gave a talk in LA, and I said something about people here. Well, I won't go too far. But my quick bottom line is, children and infants' clothing is hugely high in number in LA. Chicago, barely. They don't dress up the little kids to be able to look like a movie star. It's not just to get a job. It's because beauty is celebrated in LA that Chicago does not. So if we look at the top 15 yellow pages of visit amenities nationally, fast food restaurants, pizza, churches. Okay, so these are so this is not just 3 cities, this is the whole U.S., big and small, urban and rural. And so we've got these kinds of things. And then we classify them. What's the meaning of having children's clothing stores? That's to measure beauty. Theatricality, how do we measure this one? Okay, glamorous. Fashion shows, designer clothes, accessories, beauty salons, nail salons, movie picture exhibition. We count these, we add them up in a zip code or on a street, and then we say, this is more glamorous. It's not to say we're the judges, we don't say these are really, we don't look at each one, but we're saying if people are selling and buying places that are doing this stuff, this is our operational measure. And these are the way that we measure formality. Transgression comes from body piercing, tattoo parlors, adult entertainment, and so forth. Neighborly, bed and breakfast, country clubs, sports clubs, exhibitionism, adult entertainment, nightclubs, fashion shows. Okay, we come again to this is the first 15. Okay, we then get down to this is the 15. These are now if we then look at them by city, that's a beginning here, but basically exhibitionism, glamorous, transgressive, and racial. These are big cities have more of this. If you're above the 0, this is the national average. So these are higher than average or lower than average than the whole U.S. But I'll come back in a different way in a second. These are then weighted higher weights. So we give them 1 to 5. Very simple coding. 1 to 5, and places that are higher weights are Bible, synagogues, clergy, archives. These are traditionalist 5, score 5. Self-expressive is artists, nightclubs. So they're similar, but this is how This is how we get how we convert the data and these census items into values and beliefs, which people are taking so seriously. And most people are saying, you're using the heading of this when I called up one day, I said, can we get better data about this sort of thing? So called the census. Yes, we have the U.S. Census of Business. Okay. Could we get really to small types of business? Yes, but send us, $300 and we'll send you some CDs. How soon will I get it? Maybe 3 months. So we waited for 3 months. We got a lot of stuff there. But it was all electronic. Nothing was published anywhere. Nobody was using it. And I just happened, and I had no idea it existed. So I called it up, and it's 3 months later. 3 months later, it arrived, and they said, this is a gold mine. So we've been using this. And they have similar things in China. They have it in France, and many other countries. And it's often unpublished, and nobody uses it. Okay. These are being graphed out by map. So this is just 2 dimensions. Neighborliness, this is Bronzeville, is down here. And self-expression, this is the near north side. This is the loop. This is going on up to further in the suburbs nearby. And then in Los Angeles, we have again differences. This is Pacific Palisades, Santa Monica over here with self-expression, neighborliness, the Latin and black folks fighting over some of this. I went to try to get a deeper sense of this. I trained for the marathon. I ran in a different neighborhood for all this stuff one night. And you can see very big differences. Okay. But where and how these, that is getting a feel in the street where the Global Air data is a great way. Okay, charisma here is interesting. We have the idea of concept, of charisma, the Wagnerian idea. What's exciting? What's charismatic? And what differs in these 3 cities? The answer is in New York and Chicago. New York and LA. If you're self-expressive, you're charismatic. If you're self-expressive in Chicago, you're not charismatic. Glamorous? No, you shouldn't be glamorous in Chicago. But you should be in LA and New York. You should be in the sense that there are many shops selling things that help you to be more glamorous. They sell more lipstick. They sell more high fancy shoes. By contrast, what do we have in Chicago that makes you exciting and respected as a mayor? Neighborly. You know about the neighborhoods. You pay attention to the Chicago neighborhoods. That's what makes Chicago different. And it's egalitarian. Everybody's the same and will treat you equally and should do so. That's a Chicago value. The tradition of Chicago is respected. The past, Daily 1 did it that way. Daily 2, on the other hand, wasn't that example. I use it later on. The Daily 2 changed, but at least the sense of tradition had a legitimate exactly design. Okay, I want to end up to give you a minute or 2 questions, although I may be almost there. But this is important as we're getting close to the election here. These dimensions, these are some of the 15 dimensions of scenes. Did these explain the party differences in voting? Several presidential elections back, these were unrelated to politics in terms of party differences. Up until the first Trump election, they got more and more different. So this is a simple correlation coefficient. 1.2.3. So these differences became more and more politicized over these years in ways that these are themes like diversity, black power, feminism, and so forth. We're not, those are not traditional democratic Republican issues. And the same thing in Europe. Okay. These are the more presidential voting. What are the factors that lead to vote share for the Republican versus the Democrat? A lot of variables are important. No one of these explains everything. That's one quick bottom line to take away, which we talked about earlier. Correlations among these things are all low. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of individual choice, and those are being well recognized. These are specific variables, and African Americans is still showing right here as the deepest political divide, the deepest cultural and political voting divide in the United States today. Even though this goes back to the feudal era of slavery. This is a post-industrial society, but we still have these divisions which are there. Okay, let me stop so we can have a little discussion now. Thoughts, reactions, folks.
Well, I thought when you're talking about Paris and kind of in the age of like industrial revolution and change and things like that, I thought it was interesting how you kind of said like, Paris they started building a factory because they thought, oh, we need to jump on this wave like everyone else, and then like, whoa, you're destroying our beautiful city. And it's kind of interesting, like examples like that show what countries prioritize what, and whether it's aestheticism or industrialism, and those two things can't always coexist. Because in that same time, you had England and other countries just massively industrializing, and I just thought that was interesting.
Yes.
And then how it evolves to today, where kind of everyone just has to adapt, or else you're going to be non-existent as a country if you don't start industrializing.
But, well, the French still managed to have factories, but not in Paris.
Yeah.
They put in other cities like Toulouse. So they build automobiles and make airplanes in Toulouse and so forth. So they do have dirt in other cities.
Yeah.
But so my point is, France is big, China's bigger. If we want to understand where, instead of saying China is different, yes, but which and why, and how much does education or how much does this or that matter, getting down to smaller pieces and to components is valuable. And then what are their scenes and what clusters together, and then so you putting them together. Any follow-ups?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a question about the 15 dimension about the scenes.
Please.
Yeah, 15 dimension about sense. So I'm wondering how do we divide it as a 15 dimension?
Let me just, you can keep talking, I'll just turn this one around.
Okay.
But this is is this mine or yours?
That's mine.
Sorry, that's yours? Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about the 15 dimension of the skin. How do I decide dividing like 15 dimension about this concept?
I mean, well, two questions. That is, where did it come from, or how do we, well, let me quickly, where did it come from? We spent about a year trying to come up with something more abstract but fundamental and important. And we went over classic works of philosophy, of literature, of discussions of how do we measure national character, things like that, which were widely used in the past, and in that sense, we did not invent any of these. These are legitimated by widespread use by experts writing and thinking and talking about these things. The Bible, major works that get paid attention to. And what are the Ten Commandments? In a sense, would be a way of looking at statements of what's good and bad, right and wrong. Confucius, and so forth. Then I showed you examples of how do we measure it with the raw data with Baptist churches or Catholic churches, and we often would count those. But we do this in many different ways, including coding of words. And so the Chinese we've been working with have been doing much more with using the social media from the internet and taking those, scraping of the social media and then bringing in those texts. And those we can code their words instead of just having, so there's no one best way. All of these are useful, but the point is if we have something to look for which can be compared and be consistent in how we think about it and how we measure it, then we can compare Beijing and Shanghai against Tokyo and against Seoul and say how are they different from each other or from a small village, or which small village, and then how is that different if we go to Brazil or France or Canada.
Yes. Thank you for the explanation.
Okay, the end of the hour. We will have on Wednesday. Two points I'll say. Do come, or you don't have to come. You're welcome, but send questions. Be prepared, and we'll go over anything which we've covered in this first half of the course, which we basically discussed now. In preparation for the exam, we'll have those questions on Wednesday. The exam is next Monday. Is that right? I think so. And if you have a time conflict with the exam, that is, it's not in class. It says in the syllabus. You can take it anywhere you want, in the library, at home, whatever. We follow the university's normal plagiarism. You've got to be honest, and so forth. And then it will be sent out by our teaching assistant, Yushan. We'll send it out at the class time, and then it comes back at the end of the class time. So it's 1 hour and 20 minutes. And if that time is in conflict, and I've gotten an email today, 5 people have a conflict of time. If you have that this time is bad for you, please send an email to me and to him. He's right here on the syllabus is Yuxuan Cai. Yushan Kai.
Yeah.
Yeah, is right there. You saw him in the video now, and he will struggle. We hope it's not too hard to find an alternative time, but pretty close to that scheduled time. So timing and questions and synthesize, read through, try to put the pieces together and ask questions. We'll do on Wednesday. Thank you, folks.